Hey everyone, Zelcher here, and it looks like you guys really enjoyed the last documentary video, so I'm here to recommend you more stuff. As a reminder, for these videos, I try to avoid shockumentaries that place a focus purely on showing you gore, cause then this video would just be filled with the Death File series, and that wouldn't be fun. Instead, I want to recommend you interesting films that tackle the darkest and distressing stories of our world in unique ways. So without further ado, here are more disturbing documentaries that you should check out. First on this list, we have Afrique 50, or Africa 50. To explain why this film is important, I first have to give you the context for why it was made. In 1950, director René Vautier was commissioned to make a documentary for the French League of Schooling, which would cover the positive outcomes their educational missions had in West Africa. However, what Vautier found was the complete opposite. The area lacked any teachers or doctors, and the people were oppressed by the French army. From this, he made one of the first French anti-colonialist film, where he directly called out the companies that profited from the suffering of the area, comparing them to vultures. For his work, he was imprisoned for several months, and his film would become banned for over 40 years. Of course, the area has changed dramatically since then, but the film is a good example of why documentary filmmaking is so important. It exposes the crimes of those in power and attempts to hold them accountable when no one else can. At just over 17 minutes, this short documentary is an important piece of African and French history.
Tu t'étonnes de voir un village sans école, sans médecin. En Afrique, on ouvre une école quand les grosses compagnies coloniales ont besoin de comptables. On envoie un médecin quand les grosses compagnies coloniales risquent de manquer de main-d'œuvre. Et ce village a encore de la chance dans sa misère, il est en paix. Regarde ce qui guette les villages africains. Ici se trouvait le village de Palaka, dans le nord de la Côte d'Ivoire. Le chef du village n'a pu payer un reliquat d'impôt, 3700 francs. Le 27 février 1949, à 5 heures du matin, les troupes sont venues. Elles ont cerné le village, elles ont tiré, elles ont brûlé, elles ont tué. Ici, le chef de village, Sikali Ouattara, a été enfumé et abattu d'une balle dans la nuque, d'une balle française.
Next up, we have Lessons of Darkness by Werner Herzog. This experimental documentary covers the aftermath of the Gulf War, specifically the Kuwaitian oil fires. The film has very little in terms of commentary or interviews. Instead, the images speak mostly for themselves, through long shots showing pure devastation. The few times Herzog does speak, he describes the scenes in an eloquent and poetic way. In some ways, it reminds me of the work of Chris Marker. At other times, it reminds me of Night and Fog, a film we covered in part 1. This is one hell of a trip, and I highly recommend this film to everyone.
Two figures are approaching an oil well. One of them holds a lighted torch. What are they up to? Are they going to rekindle the blaze? Has life without fire become unbearable for them?
Next up, we have Sicko by Michael Moore, which just mentioning that name might be off-putting for some people. And I get it, he's a very polarizing figure, but I do think he effectively opens up conversations on topics that many Americans either don't want to talk about or simply aren't aware of. And with this one, he covers the American healthcare industry, which at best is an incompetent system, and at worst, downright corrupt at its core. It's the unfortunate conclusion one comes to when hearing interviews with patients who fought with their insurance, and the people who work directly in the insurance industry. This is an eye-opening and honestly really bleak documentary, considering how little has changed since its release. Check it out if you haven't already. Next up, we have 102 Minutes That Changed America. This is a documentary about the attacks that happened in America during 2001. Just based off that vague description, you can kinda understand why I'm not showing any footage or more specifically, why YouTube isn't letting me show you any. Unfortunately, you can't really talk about this event without being labeled a menace in the YouTube system. Anyways, there are plenty of documentaries that cover this exact subject, but what sets this one apart is that it's constructed from footage taken from random people or random cameras in the area. It's essentially a found footage documentary of the event from when it began to when it ended. There are no interviews, there's no slant, it's the event as it unfolded from the eyes of people who were there. It's a heavy subject, but an interesting take for a documentary like this. Next up, we have Armadillo, directed by Janice Metz. This documentary follows Danish soldiers stationed at the Armadillo military base during the war in Afghanistan. It offers an intimate view of the combat during war and the effect it has on the area and the locals. At the same time, it covers the prevailing culture and attitudes found within the military. I won't spoil anything, but let's just say the subjects faced some controversy after this film was released. This is often described as one of the most intense war documentaries, so if this looks interesting to you, then check it out. Next up, we have The Ambassador by Mads Brugger. He's a Danish journalist who goes undercover as a Liberian ambassador in an effort to uncover corruption between diplomatic title brokerage and the blood diamond trade. Because of the secretive subject matter, some filming is done with hidden cameras. Unintentionally, it ends up giving these scenes this very unnerving look to them. It's fitting for a film where the subject is pretty much in danger at all times. While it does have its moments of dark humor, don't go into this expecting something on the level of Borat. It can get into some pretty serious business talk. It's the type of film that demands your attention, so if this looks interesting to you, then check it out.
How did I become a diplomat in the Central African Republic? It's a story which begins in Portugal. Here on the outskirts of the town of Coimbra resides the Evans brothers, a second-generation British diplomatic title brokerage headed by the oldest brother, former Royal Marine Commando Colin Evans.
A white European with a reason to travel backwards and forwards out of Europe to a diamond producing country in Africa and back again on a regular basis with diplomatic credentials, right, is a very, very, very valuable piece of kit. Okay? And I know exactly how valuable it is. I could do this through the brokerage. I could put that up on the brokerage as a definition, right? For €1 million, it would go in a week.
Next, we have Welcome to Leith by Michael Beach Nichols and Christopher Walker. This documentary covers white supremacist Craig Cobb's attempt to take over the small North Dakota city of Leith. Craig Cobb's goal was to essentially create a racist utopia, and because the city's population was so drastically low, he could easily do this through legal means of buying property. This film documents the immense fear felt by the residents and concern for the future of the city. And surprisingly, the directors even get a chance to interview the white supremacists themselves and really delve into how they think, how they live their life, and the methods they use to achieve their goals. This whole ordeal happened almost a decade ago, so if you haven't heard of it yet, I suggest giving this one a watch.
The idea it's just Cobb and Dutton is a huge mistake because there's a lot more people involved in this stuff. These guys are just the front runners. These guys are the guys that are trying to plant the seeds, you know, but there's a lot of other people. All you have to do is go to these websites where these guys are promoting this crap and talking about this crap. This is off of a White Nations post. This is Craig Cobb himself. Now I want again to put out a call. We see all political, racially aware whites, longtime incarcerated whites, especially from federal prisons, as many as possible, and fast too. Now is the time to draw your sword.
So now we've reached the honorable mentions category. These films still cover heavy subjects, but I find them more interesting than disturbing, if that makes any sense. Anyways, the first film we have is Grizzly Man, also by Werner Herzog. This documentary covers the life and eventual death of self-proclaimed Grizzly Man Timothy Treadwell and his efforts to protect bears in national parks. Timothy Treadwell was an interesting yet polarizing figure, and Herzog makes sure to interview people who had nice things and not so nice things to say about him. This film routinely ends up on Disturbing Films lists, and I would have put it in the first video, but I kinda just forgot. It's one of Herzog's more popular films, but if you haven't seen it yet, definitely give it a watch. Next we have The Wolfpack by Crystal Moselle. This documentary follows a group of brothers who have been sheltered from the outside world for almost their entire life. Their only form of communication with the outside world is through the films they're able to watch. The topic of childhood abuse always looms over each scene, but it's able to balance that out by showing the love these brothers have for film. So yeah, it's pretty much the only film here that isn't completely bleak the whole way through. And finally, we have Rat Film by Theo Anthony. This film covers the rat infestation problem in Baltimore and connects that with the ever-increasing issues of segregation, redlining, poverty, and resource allocation in the area. So yeah, quite a bit to unpack here, and it makes a lot more sense than you might think. There's a point where the film covers the Rat Utopia experiment, which was also covered in a Down the Rabbit Hole video. I think they make pretty good companion pieces for each other, so if you've seen that video already, consider giving this a shot too. So there you go, 10 more documentaries for you to check out. I think limiting it to 10 per video keeps the video at a pretty reasonable length. Unless of course you guys want these videos to be a little longer, then let me know down below in the comment section. There are still plenty of documentaries I have left to cover, so this series will continue for quite some time. Anyways, shout out to the patrons as per usual, and I will see you in the next one.